Survival fascinates people because they ask themselves, how would I react on a situation like this one? Special features in my character that would allow me to survive, or I would collapse and die. My name is Nando Parrado, and I was 21 years old when the crash happened in the Andes Mountains in 1972.
On Thursday, the 12th of October, 1972, a flight departed from Carrasco International Airport. It was a cloudy day, making the atmosphere a bit gloomy in Uruguay. The flight was taking the Old Christians Club rugby team to play a friendly match with Old Boys Club in Santiago, Chile. Along with the rugby team, that plane was also taking some of their friends and family with 5 crew members. On its way to Santiago, the plane trembled violently as it entered the core of a furious storm. Souls shook up as the aircraft descended through the chaos, finally finalizing an emergency landing in Argentina on Friday the 13th. The weather was still not good for flying, so the captain postponed the departure till the afternoon. Finally, at 2:18 p.m., the plane took off again for Santiago, but this time the passengers never knew that they would never make it to their final destination. Pilot Parrado had previously flown across the Andes 29 times. On this flight, he was training co-pilot La Guerrara, who was at the controls. As they flew above the Andes, clouds obscured the mountains below. The inexperienced co-pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Dante Hector La Guerrara, was piloting the aircraft at the time of the accident. He mistakenly believed the aircraft had overflown Curacao. The flight time from Planchon Pass to Curacao is normally 11 minutes, but only 3 minutes later, the co-pilot radioed Santiago that they were overflying Curacao and turning due north. He requested permission from air traffic control to descend. The controller authorized the aircraft to descend to 3,500 meters, 11,500 feet, unaware due to lack of radar coverage that the airplane was still flying over the Andes. Pilot Parrado also failed to notice that instrument readings indicated he was still 60 to 69 kilometers east of Curacao. La Guerrara, upon regaining visual flight conditions, saw the mountain and unsuccessfully tried to gain altitude. The aircraft struck a mountain ridge, shearing off both wings and the tail cone.
We were flying near the peaks of the mountains. We didn't know that at the time because it was very cloudy. And just coming out of a couple of clouds, we saw by the windows that the black side of the mountains very near the tip of the wings.
When the tail cone was sheared off, it took with it the rear part of the aircraft, including 2 rows of seats, the galley, baggage hold, vertical stabilizer, and horizontal stabilizer, leaving a gaping hole in the rear. 3 passengers, the navigator and the flight attendant, were lost with the tail section. The aircraft's momentum and its remaining engine carried it forward and upward until a rock outcropping at 14,400 feet tore off the left wing. Its propeller sliced through the fuselage. 2 more passengers fell out of the gaping hole in the rear. Plane continued to descend on the slope until it rammed into a snowbank and came to a sudden stop. The seats broke loose from the floor and were thrown against the forward bulkhead of the fuselage. 12 persons had lost their lives, unfortunately. The impact crushed the cockpit, pinning both pilots against the instrument panel, killing Parrado immediately. There were 40 young rugby players and 5 crew members in that unfortunate plane. Some of the passengers expired right there, including team's physician and his wife. The plane's pilots were most vulnerable at that time during the plane's slam. They had their chests crushed against the instrument, penal resulting in sudden death of the captain. The co-pilot also died the same day, but the time he stayed alive and injured was nothing more than a glimpse of hell. No one knew where they were. What they had seen was all over endless, freezing, unimaginable challenges and pains. Their only shelter was broken or shattered pieces of the remaining plane. They smartly used clothing, baggage, and seats to cover themselves from the cold. Despite these hardships, every moment was beyond laborious, and the cold was their constant enemy. The final number of survivors at that time was 33. Unfortunately, most of those survivors were badly injured with fatal injuries and multiple fractures in legs, arms, ribs, even in the skull. Story of literal surviving these extreme conditions starts after this episode of injuries. Among the students were 2 medical students who were like angels sent from heaven. Both of these boys brought their skills into play and tried to start helping the wounded passengers with the negligible first aid that they managed to find from the broken plane. Nando Parrado, their fellow player, had his skull fractured. He remained unconscious for more or less 3 days. Another player, Enrique, had a metal piece pierced into his stomach. When Canessa and Gustavo tried to treat it, that metal piece brought a chunk of his intestine with it. That condition was not bigger than his will to help other passengers. He nonetheless began helping others immediately. Soon after disappearing from the radar, Chilean rescue services started a rescue search for the plane. It dispatched 4 planes towards the last known location, the Curacao corridor from Angostura to Santiago. Rescue services were not able to locate the plane's crash site. That's when they decided to hear the last audio recordings of the plane's transmission, where the co-pilot did the miscalculation and announced that he had entered Chile. Rescuers and survivors both didn't know the actual crash site. On the following day, 11 rescue planes from Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay combined went on a search mission for Flight 571. The biggest challenge hindering the rescue search was the plane's white color, which made it nearly invisible against the bright, shiny snow. According to the survivors, the rescue aircrafts passed the crash site thrice, but they couldn't see the broken plane. Survivors tried to write an SOS message on the plane using the lipsticks they had, but clearly it was a bad idea because lipsticks were not enough. Then they tried to write the SOS message with the luggage, but this effort was also in vain. The weather was constantly turning worse, making it impossible to survive. That's what the rescuers thought after searching for 8 days. A total of 143 search hours. Unknown to the survivors, the rescue mission was aborted on the 21st of October. The first few days after the crash were harsh, forcing the rugby team to learn survival tactics with the bare minimum. Most of the boys had never experienced cold climates, let alone the snow-covered peaks of the Andes. Harsh weather conditions took 5 more lives, leaving the 28 survivors to deal with the cold. They emptied the plane's carcass to be used as shelter. They used luggage, seats, and snow to close off the rear end of the fuselage. Fito Strauch, who had little knowledge of electric circuits, devised a solar-powered water collector. After 3 days, Parrado regained consciousness only to learn that his mother had died and his 19-year-old sister Susanna was severely injured. He tried to keep his sister alive, but on the 9th day, she too died from her injuries. The remaining 27 survivors had a hard time during the nights when temperatures plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Later, one of the survivors, Roy Harley, found a transmitter from the broken cockpit. That was a ray of hope for 28 people. He somehow managed to make it work, but the first setback they had was finding out that the transmitter is only one way, which means they can receive the messages, but they cannot send one. The second shock was far more devastating for them, and it was when they received the news of cancellation of the rescue operations. Gustavo Nikolic had become resilient as he came out of the aircraft and uttered, "Hey boy," he shouted, "there's some good news we just heard on the radio. They've called off the search." "Why the hell is that good news?" Pius shouted angrily at Nikolic. "Because it means," Nikolic said, "that we're going to get out of here on our own." The courage of this one man prevented a flood of total despair from overcoming the group. Surviving in a place with no vegetation or animals to eat was a very hectic job. The survivors had very little food to eat. They found 8 chocolate bars, 3 small jars of jam, a tin of mussels, a tin of almonds, a few dates, some candy, dried plums, and several bottles of wine. They rationed the meager supply of food, but it lasted only a week. Somehow they tried to eat stuffing of the seats, leather belts, and shoes, but it was hard to digest, thus making them sick. There they had to make a hard decision, to starve to death or to opt to eat their fellows' dead bodies. They decided to go with the second option. They used a broken glass from the windshield as the knife to cut off the meat. First, it was difficult for them to chew that, but then they tried to sun-dry the meat to make it a bit easier to eat. On 29th of October, and 16 days after the crash, it was almost midnight when they heard a weird sound of rumbling, which was making their hearts pound in terror. Suddenly, the deep, thunderous sound filled the air with a booming roar. Everything happened in seconds. Before anyone could move or think, a giant avalanche of snow fell into the fuselage from the upper mountains, along with an unstoppable downpour of snow. Everything happened in seconds. Before anyone could move or think, a giant avalanche of snow fell into the fuselage from the upper mountains, along with an unstoppable downpour of snow. Meanwhile, the snow was powerful enough to crush some of the survivors, and everything went black as they got jammed into the fuselage with snow. Things went more horrible for them. It was not possible to eat, move, and even breathe. From this point, all of battling with the bulk of the snow to get out of it alive. Some screamed but couldn't be heard, while others pushed with all their strength to move the heavy snow, but couldn't bear its weight, and the rest entered eternal rest. 8 survivors died in this nightmare. 100% true that survival demands sacrifices. Now only 19 survivors remain, constantly wondering who will be the next. All the survivors were jam-packed in the small space filled with heavy snow.
The boys which I say experienced them, told me not to try.
At that time, Parrado was the one who put in his tremendous effort and used metal poles to make holes in the snow. They tried hard to allow some ventilation. After their hard work, they successfully made a tunnel through the snow. But escaping that snow tunnel was extremely difficult. However, they finally made it to the surface. As soon as they touched the surface, they realized another snowstorm was coming, and it would be better to stay under the snow cave to survive. Otherwise, they would lose their lives. For the next 3 days, they hardly managed to stay alive under a jam-packed snow cave. Then after the unstoppable struggles, they went out on the surface. After 3 days, as they came out, the hopelessness reflected on their face. Heavy breathing and cracked lips, portraying that they all knew that no one was coming to save them. They had a deep realization if they want to stay alive, they would have to continue making hard efforts to survive, or if death was fated, they would fight until their last breath. Now they understood that there was no point in staying on the plane and waiting for help. First of all, they made a strategy to survive. They found Canessa, Parrado, and Byzantine are strongest among all survivors, so they decided to feed them more food than the others. This wasn't the only food, but they decided to give them more warm clothes for ensuring their survival. And so these 3 would walk around making efforts and asking for help. After saving their strongest survivors, now they planned to locate the exact location. At this point, one of the survivors recalled the co-pilot's message. Before the crash, the co-pilot said that the aircraft had passed Curico. They thought that if they walked a few kilometers to the west, they would definitely enter the rural region of Chile. But the survivors had no idea about this wrong move. The truth is that not even the co-pilot had any idea about where he was taking the plane. Their crash location was 89 kilometers east in the middle of the Andes Mountains. Unfortunately, they still had no idea about this reality. They took some rest at that place to move forward. After resting for 2 or 3 days, now it's the 15th of November and 33 days after the crash. Days passed, but no one came to rescue them. 3 of them decided to walk and in the search of help. After covering some miles with hope, they found another large piece of the aircraft which had broken off earlier. Then they came closer to that piece. They got some things like chocolates, a bottle of rum, extra clothes, 3 meat patties, and comic books. Along with these things, they had another interesting thing in it. It was an aircraft 2-way radio station. This is not just a radio that can communicate through calls, but also can send messages. Now this radio has become the ray of hope, the hope to contact people and ask for help. They decided to start the radio up. To start the radio, they need some batteries. Surprisingly, they found a 25-kilogram battery in the aircraft tail section, but it was too heavy to carry it to the main aircraft body. Then they decided to turn it on right there. They turned back to their friends and asked for help. They took the help of Roy Harley. He knew about electronics. But woefully, this plan didn't work. The aircraft's electrical radio system ran on 115 volts AC, but the battery was 24 DC. There is no such connection between them. Soon they realized this fact and gave up this plan. After giving up on the radio, they had no option but to start walking to the west. On November 11, 59 days after the crash, another avalanche hit. It was another big scary moment in their lives, and they lost more than 3 friends in the storm.
Completely by the snow in the avalanche, and it's the most deadly silence you may imagine. I couldn't move.
Sadly, only 16 survivors remained. To climb the mountains now, they need to stay at night. But how could they survive at minus 30 Celsius? Among them were the younger ones. Who was just 18-year-old boy who knew sewing and had his sewing kit? They told the group that his mother taught them about sewing. He had the idea to sew different pieces of cloth together to make a sleeping bag. The next day, the three strongest survivors, Vicentin, Parrado, and Canessa, decided to climb the glacier without any essential gear. They still believe that Chile is the next to the mountains, and for going down, they need to climb the mountain. It was tougher than ever, but they had no choice. They thought they were just a few kilometers away from the rural region. Moreover, they thought it would take 3 days to cover this distance. On this basis, they had taken only 3 days' meals with them. You can imagine how impossible it is to climb a glacier without any proper equipment, training, and skill. Do you know how hard they prepared themselves for all this? They had no compass, no map, and no essentials. But Parrado wore 3 pairs of jeans, 3 sweaters, and 4 pairs of socks for his survival from the cold. At that time, what they had faced will give you goosebumps. Climbing without any skill set was unbearable. With the heavy coldness, their hands and feet started freezing, and as far as they were climbing upward, they were feeling a lack of oxygen. As we all know, as we climb closer to the top, there is thin air. Despite all these circumstances, they kept climbing upwards. They used sleeping bags to stay at night and slept closer to each other. As the sun grew, they started moving forward. After battling for 3 days, on the 4th day when they had no food left, and they had seen no end of their journey, they sadly realized that their estimation was wrong about the west direction. Vicentin decided to go back to the crash site. This time it was easy for him to cross downhill. He used an aircraft seat, a sleigh, and after an hour they came back to the crash site. But Canessa and Parrado kept claiming glaciers. After putting all his efforts, both of them barely reached the tip of the mountain. But they were shocked and despairing after nothing but snow, endless snow. There was only snow as far as they could see. They couldn't breathe or even stand as they had seen 360 around them, snow-covered mountains. We didn't know if we had enough air. We didn't know if we had 2 meters, 4 meters, or 50 meters of snow on top, says Parrado. They couldn't see, but they sat there and kept watching these mountains, thinking about where to go. After some time, they noticed on the west horizon, there were 2 mountains without snow. It's become another flicker of hope. They thought they should not stop there. They started to follow this direction. After facing endless suffering, both of them never gave up. They keep hiking for several days. At long last, Parrado and Canessa reached the valley, exhausted yet alive. As they saw the valley with a flowing stream, they took a sigh of relief. They continued trekking and walking for 9 days. On the 20th of December, they could found some animals and humans. But they were dead tired even though they could not walk properly. Suddenly, they saw a man on a horse the next to the stream. Parrado shouted, but there was the gurgling sound of the stream and no one could hear them. But in a flash, someone noticed them and shouted back, "Tomorrow." He wanted to say that I would come back tomorrow. The next day, the same man appeared on the other side of the stream. But this time, the smart man came with a pencil and paper. The man attached a piece of paper and a pencil to a stone with thread and threw it on the other side of the stream. Now, this is a big opportunity for both of them to write their message and save it. Parrado wrote in Spanish on paper, "I came from the plain and fell in the mountains. I am from Uruguay. I have been walking for 10 days. My injured friends are there at the crash site. They need help urgently. They don't have food. They don't know how to get help." The man who received this paper read this message and showed them a gesture that he understood. After this, that man started talking to his friends about it. They faintly remembered that they knew about the plane crash. They heard about it on television. They were shocked to learn that 2 months after the plane had crashed in the mountain, 2 people had survived. They couldn't believe all this. A man named Sergio threw a pack of bread at them. And for the next 10 hours, Sergio rode towards the west. They were still 10 hours away from any village. As far as Parrado and Canessa reached the village, Los Maitenes, where they had some rest. At this point, this news travels rapidly. As soon as people got to know about their story, it became international news. The Army of Chile sent 3 helicopters to rescue survivors. They had taken Parrado and Canessa's interviews to get the whole story and the exact location of the crash site and survivors. On 22nd December 1972, finally rescue helicopters found the remaining survivors and saved their lives. 16 survivors were rescued. They were rescued in terrible conditions, having various health issues, but soon all of them recovered. This story depicts the miracle of hope. If you have resilience and dedication, you can achieve anything. There is one more thing. The miracle of Andes proved that in the face of death, we discovered the true meaning of life. Interested in more videos like this? Don't forget to like and share. Hit the subscribe button for exciting videos on your favorite topics. Keep commenting your reviews on our videos.